Hello and welcome to Legally Speaking with me, Tarun Nangia. Today we are going to deal with the topic of offshore accounts and offshore trusts. Why there is no criminality at all in having either an offshore account or an offshore trust. In fact, it is permitted by the government, encouraged by the government. Even to raise loans abroad, many individuals and companies have opened such accounts and trusts fully declared with the government. So with the recent revelation in the Pandora Papers, I saw two things. People like Sachin Tendulkar, who have been awarded the Bharat Ratna, who in a sense are the pride of our country, had to come out and make a statement that my account is legitimate. And his photo appears alongside fugitives, people who have genuinely, in a sense, taken out money from this country and then have been implicated in cases. Secondly, somebody like Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, who the whole nation prides, creating one of the finest biotechnology companies. She issued a statement that media stories are wrongly implicating the offshore trust. Our today's question is, can we paint all businessmen with the same brush? And for this, I have a very eminent panel with me. I have with me Senior Advocate Amit Desai, a well-known advocate for some of India's top corporates. I have with me Advocate Rohan Shah, one of India's finest brains in direct and indirect tax. He comes on my show for the first time. Welcome, Mr. Shah. I have with me Mohit Saraf. He's managing partner of Saraf and Partners. I have with me Ruby Singh Ahuja. She's a senior partner with Karanjawala and Company, one of India's leading litigation law firms. I have with me Advocate Abhimanyu Bhandari. He's a door tenant at Fort Pump Court and an advocate who does a lot of FEMA cases and also practices before the Supreme Court of India. Welcome all of you. And may I start my evening with the first introductory comment. Senior Advocate Amit Desai, may you open this whole issue with your opening comment. What do you think when such revelations come out? What harm does it do to the genuine businessman who works for this country and gets a lot of foreign exchange for my country?
Thank you again, Tarun, for having me on your show. It's always a pleasure to be here. So I was a little surprised this morning when I read the morning newspaper to see the manner in which, if I might say, the issue of the Pandora Papers has been planned and set out. Whilst I understand the importance of some of these revelations and what the ICIJ is doing is, of course, a yeoman service when you're dealing with the larger issues across the world in exposing people who may have acted in an inappropriate manner, who may have acted contrary to the laws of their own countries. But to contextualize those kind of cases with the kind of cases that I had to see this morning in the newspaper, which is, as you rightly mentioned, our cricketing icon, Bharat Ratna Sachin Tendulkar, whose statement, of course, has been reproduced in the newspaper to say that he didn't do anything wrong. The question that came to my mind was that do businessmen who conduct themselves in a legitimate manner, who comply with the laws, are they entitled to the privacy of their own business dealings? And as we go on in the show, I will tell you, but the law is, as I think, very well settled in India, that personal information on financial matters, so long as they are compliant with the law, are entitled to remain confidential. And when you position this confidential information in the context of other cases where there is public interest, because there may have been transactions which may be contrary to law, and there may be a larger public interest in relation to those transactions. Is there an innuendo? Is there an innuendo in relation to those who are complying with the law when they are contextualized with those who are not complying with the law? And this is something which I think is something we need to be cautious about and careful about, because today the right of privacy is a fundamental right in this country.
So right to privacy is a fundamental right. I'll go to Mr. Rohan Shah. in your introductory comment, what do you feel, and when you read these revelations, what was your reaction to innocent people being tarnished and their innocence images being hurt because of this?
Tarun, firstly, thank you for having me on the show the first time, but entirely my pleasure. Tarun, I think, whether we talk of the Panama Papers, whether we talk of Pandora, there is a certain context which immediately arises. Uh, when you talk of jurisdictions which are seen as tax havens, when you talk of trusts, when you talk of, certain types of personalities of eminence in whichever field of life you're talking about. Now, when all these three things come together, the perception of the common man is, look, there is something quite sinister and terrible happening here. And when you see that, this is really information across the board, across so many jurisdictions and personalities, the issue is that immediate recall of people being presented in a manner as if they've done something illegal, I think to begin with is the biggest negative. I'm not about sieving between, those who have a certain image and those who don't. Actually, everybody gets almost commonly labeled, and nobody waits to go to the aspect that in several jurisdictions where people are referred to, money, even on capital account, is freely movable. In the Indian context, even as something as LRS, which is sort of known to everyone, allows you a certain sort of remittance across family members, entirely legitimate. Several applications of the money that you take outside of India, entirely legitimate. Several trusts which you create, entirely legitimate. Many business purposes, again, entirely legitimate. So the fact that nobody makes the effort to really demarcate between those who legitimately have taken money out and are pursuing a valid objective vis-a-vis those who may not quite have done things legally or ethically, the fact that you will continually brand them together, and then it is the onus of the individual to prove that, look, I don't deserve to be so categorized, damage, of course, being done. Because, if you see the social media comments today, I don't think Mr. Tendulkar will feel like a Bharat Ratna. I don't think he will feel like an honored son of this country. I think he will feel pretty petty, and he will feel pretty cross that he's in the sort of company that he would have never dreamt of. So I think besides the privacy issue, the fact that you are in a media trial, even if what you're doing is completely legitimate, I think is A, unfair, and B, is too heavy a onus, because you take 2-3 years to shift that sort of perception, even if you're completely right.
Thank you so much for sharing this view with me. Mohit Saraf, Managing Partner, Saraf and Partners, joins us. Mr. Saraf, image gets maligned. Every business runs on investment. There are investment companies, there are banks, there are people who deal with you on trust. Such random allegations, what sort of impact does it have on an industrialist, a businessman, somebody who's going about his daily life?
I think it is a very, very significant impact. If you think about private equity, now most companies today, FIIs own almost 30-40% of our top NSE, BSE companies. Now, if any of the promoter is named there, I think they all understand that it'll take years and years in India before that person will be out. And even if he's out, general presumption will be that he's fixed the system. And therefore, if you think about it, that it is basically, if you are in the middle of your capex, you're raising capital, you're raising private equity, and something like that happens, general boardrooms in the US and UK will say, stay away. So really what you've done is that you destroyed the entire business model. You destroyed companies. You lead to these two defaults of banks because you're trying to raise capital for servicing some other expansion plan. So these are very significant things. And particularly, I think, as what Rohan said, that the presumption is that you are guilty. I think the general perception, the minute anything comes out, everybody believes there is a problem. And I think that people miss it, that really there are even RBI says if the foreign account, if the foreign trust is properly disclosed, then there's no problem. If you pay taxes, if you get money, there's no problem. When people travel, they are allowed to open off a bank account. When they're students, they're allowed to open accounts. If their family members are outside, then they're allowed to. You have to disclosure. Now, if you look at the entire revelation, nowhere it said that this was disclosed to the regulator. So the presumption is everybody on the list has siphoned the money off. And that's a wrong presumption. I think there is a lot of structures. I think they may have been disclosed. Also, there is a possibility that most people are not settlers. They are beneficiary. And again, the earlier Supreme Court believed that if you are a beneficiary, you should not be implicated. But now I think the general presumption is that even if you are a beneficiary, the law should take, the view should be that you have taken the money and the onus is virtually on you to prove otherwise. So I would say it's a very difficult situation. And if it takes 3-4 years, I think people are, I think they're really outcast in that sense.
Point well taken. Now we'll go to Ruby Singh Ahuja. Now yours is a leading litigation law firm. You also know many people by the virtue interact with businessmen. Having accounts abroad is a normal course of business activity. What kind of harm it does to the reputation and the privacy of clients like yours when such allegations are made? What kind of damage in your way can be avoided? What can we do to avoid such things?
Hi, Tarun, and good evening to everyone. See, Tarun, I'll tell you the harm. The harm actually is done. There is one line now people use. If you meet somebody socially, the line is used, iska naam Panama Papers mein aaya tha. So everybody whose name comes in Panama paper is a thief, has put his money illegally somewhere. So I think that is the harm. You take away everybody's reputation by what you are a media house. You want to come with the story, by all means, that's your job. And I think, as Mr. Desai rightly said, you're doing a great job. But when you put everybody in the same bracket, from a businessman to a sports player to a fugitive, then you're saying wealth is bad. You all are thief, basically. That is the impression you are creating. In fact, whether you're grouping somebody with a fugitive or you're grouping somebody with a default, even I have a problem even if you group a fugitive and a defaulter together. Because tomorrow, what is the impression you're creating? That, look, he's a defaulter. He has also parked his money outside. Now that money, that person who's perceived in society as defaulter, he may be speaking to somebody, he may be having one-time settlement, he might be fighting some case, but that is the impression you have created, that he has parked his money somewhere outside. And the reputation goes for a toss. It affects your investments. It affects the stock prices of the company on that day. So I think, what is the option you leave for a person? You are not going to put 3 brackets in the story and say this is legitimate, this is not legitimate. Then you leave the option. Either you come up with a clarification, as some of them have done today, or you go and file a defamation. And there is nobody better on this panel than Mr. Desai to tell you that a defamation case in India doesn't ever end. So I think this whole thing, this also creates socially a very, very negative impact. I think somewhere in our society, especially it's in India, there is some sort of a notion that wealth is bad. And this creates that notion and encourages that notion in society, which is not good for any economy. Every businessman, every wealthy man is not a thief. People make investments. People work hard, and that is how businesses grow. If you keep on encouraging this, you are affecting the economy also of the country. So I think there has to be some line drawn somewhere. Nobody is saying don't report, but please make sure that you protect people, corporates' reputation, individuals' reputation, or otherwise you are leaving them to eat. Nobody is going to read that Twitter or a tweet which Mr. Tendulkar would have made today. people would have read that newspaper story and formed that impression and said ki haan ji iska naam ab aa gaya Panama Papers mein. So I think
You made a right point that you spoil your name gets spoiled. It takes a lot of time to clean it up. Abhimanyu Bhandari, you deal with such people. You've dealt with FEMA cases, you've dealt with clients and money laundering matters. When you deal with many such businessmen, many of times they are acquitted. But if there is a sudden story which names 600 people, many of them innocent, what risk we run as a society that is a capitalist society, a society that aims to be a $5-10 trillion economy, a society that is aiming to be the second largest economy in the world? What problems will such kind of hysteria lead to, that anybody in a list and we label him as a corrupt person? Anybody in the list, we label him as somebody, okay, he has illegally parked wealth. What risk we run with this kind of nomenclatures that we do?
Sure. I think all the speakers have dwelt into the aspect that the whole narrative is quite negative in these stories. We talk about, if you read the two words that come out in each of those articles is that somehow these transactions are shadowy transactions to hide assets. Now, they may not be shadowy transactions. They may be absolutely bona fide transaction. It may be a young professional sending money under the liberalized scheme that RBI has set up. It might be a businessman trying to create an asset portfolio abroad in accordance with master circular of the RBI. So they are not shadowy transactions, but that whole presumption that has been given that it is a shadowy transaction is quite scary. But before we get to that, I think what is more scary is that now we are increasingly living in a world where there is no data protection. I mean, whether I, you, or anyone has a bank account, whether it is in the BVI or whether it is with State Bank of India, Vasant Vihar branch, our bank statements and our transactions should be our private affair. And only an investigating agency in accordance with law should be able to get that if they want to investigate. It should not be for public consumption. So the fact that 11 million documents or however of transactions are being floating around of people's private transactions, I think is a huge inroad on privacy issue. I think the real bullet point is that we urgently need a very robust data protection act in our country. And so that we need to kind of stop this, because how do you know that tomorrow my bank statements are not going to be floated around, and for that matter anywhere. Now, therefore I think that the whole regime of data protection act has to come in, and we have to strengthen our privacy laws to ensure that a good person is not labeled a bad person only on a mere presumption. I mean, it's shocking that today I saw Sachin Tendulkar's wife's signature in a document. And I saw his, I think, one of his family members' signatures in a document. How can you get those documents? It's his private document. How can you put it in public space like that? When, there's nothing wrong that he has done. Or till now, no investigating agency has even said that he has done something wrong.
You've made a good point on the point of right to privacy and what kind of dangers we may put to people who are not those top industrialists, but people who have some sums of money abroad, by exposing the veil behind which they actually have their own personal assets. It's a good point. On this note, I'll take a short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Just before the break, we had Abhimanyu sharing with us how the right to privacy gets invaded. I'll go to senior advocate Amit Desai. Mr. Desai, you deal with clients from, in a sense, every class of business, industrialists, business people, corporate CEOs and executives. They all have worked in various countries of the world. Somebody works in Hong Kong, comes to Bombay, sets up office works. Somebody sets up many companies abroad. On the aspect of right to privacy, if we lift the veil behind which they have, in a sense, parked their private assets, it's their private information. Do you think we also expose them to dangers and unknown, in a sense, problems which, could never be attributed to media exposure of their personal assets? Do you think it's not the right thing, or it will harm that person if assets are exposed that so-and-so has 100 crores, so-and-so has 20 crores in this account? This is a sort of information everybody wants to keep to himself. What do you feel about this? You're not audible.
Let me just preface my comments on your question with a couple of things. First, as a matter of law. In India, in the Constitution Bench judgment in Puttaswamy, Justice Nariman's judgment, if I might just point one sentence very directly with the question that we are dealing with here, he said, in response to an argument that was put across to say that every facet of privacy is not protected, and in instance of what is not protected was taxation information. And in response to that argument that was put across by Mr. Sundaram, Justice Nariman says, we are afraid that this is really putting the cart before the horse. Taxation laws which require the furnishing of information certainly impinge upon the privacy of every individual which ought to receive protection. This is now our Constitution Bench directly in the context of taxation, and this is the kind of information we're dealing with. You must also know that in India, under the Right to Information Act, personal information, which includes personal financial information as held by the Supreme Court, is also private and cannot be disclosed under the Right to Information Act. Now, this is the protection that we, in a sense, have both under the Constitution Bench judgment, under the RTI, and also under the provisions of the Income Tax Act. Now, therefore, coming back to your question that you asked, rightly so, why do we have these kind of provisions for privacy that are already provided for? People who conduct legitimate business, and particularly the problems of the last 10 or 15 years, when we are seeing the kind of inroads that are happening by means of hacking of information in the banking system, in private information of people, the number of frauds that are taking place. The moment you expose all these business transactions and business people and all their dealings, and as Abhimanyu said, for example, the signatures of the family members are out there on the internet. It is very easy today to forge a signature. It is very easy. So there's enough technology available which can create a fictitious signature. You have the bank account numbers out there. You will have now the PAN numbers out there. You might have the Aadhaar numbers out there. You will have all the private data which enables a hacker to hack into somebody's system and cause greater loss, because you put all this out now in the public domain. Now, therefore, as Abhimanyu rightly said, one is the need for data protection. But I raise a larger question today, and I say this, that as an organization, what is our own sense of responsibility when we assess information that we have received? And we find that that information indicates that the transactions are legitimate. Do we not have a responsibility to protect that information, considering the fact that it was legitimate? Is there a larger public interest that is being derived by exposing people who are complying with the law, conducting their affairs in a legitimate manner, and putting them out all in the newspapers the way in which it has been done? That is the reason why I say that it causes, of course, it exposes them to all kinds of risks and dangers. It exposes them in today's environment where every day we are reading about the kind of hacks that are taking place across the world. And when you put this kind of information out there, you have exposed them. People now know what their wealth is. You don't know what kind of calls they may get. Because people understand what's going on.
Mr. Desai, you made a very important point. What kind of calls they will get?
Yes.
If people know how much wealth people have, we are putting their life at risk, their liberty at risk. The world, the world and the country that we live in, it's a problem. People shouldn't know what you have. It's your private information. I'll go to Mr. Rohan Shah. Mr. Rohan Shah, what risks do we run? Genuinely, somebody has a house in London, it's his private business. He may not even want to tell his extended family. Somebody is holding some money abroad for his kids, doesn't want everybody to know. Some random list exposes 600 names, all 600 go to, in a sense, the media. Does it have an impact on people's lives, which can then never be attributed to the leak? Somebody suffers some personal issue later in terms of, family feud or some calls. It can never be attributed to the leak. The information got into the public domain, then it will be used by people. What risks do we run as a society, Mr. Shah?
I think the risks are really multifarious, right? Let's look at one aspect of it. One, I have conducted my life in a certain manner. I have incomes, I have wealth, I am law-abiding. The least I would expect of the system to which I pay taxes is that I will have the guarantee of my fundamental rights, and I will have the protections that I should be entitled to as a law-abiding citizen. Privacy is a fundamental right. Now, in a situation like this, Today, if I am to be clubbed with somebody who reputationally or is proven to have never followed the law, or to have done several things which were inconsistent with what legally ought to have been done, today you've placed me in the same category as that person, right?
Yes.
So besides the factor that many people and many undesirable elements in society have access to what my personal wealth is, where it is, who my family members are, their signatures, etc. Let's look at what happens in the normal course. Does a front page headline in India just disappear innocuously in 2 days? No, it typically goes to a committee, because the committee will be set up because this is too sensational not to be looked at. Then you are going to have some sort of a proceeding. You will potentially have a FEMA show cause notice. You will answer the process because it is such a sensational case. Even if you succeed in adjudication, will go to appeal. Appeal will go to a further appeal. You will not be let off unless you get to the Supreme Court. Now, from that perspective, you're really talking a 10-year period where, for acting within the law, not only are you perceived as someone who's done the wrong thing, but you are permanently on trial for 10 years, because every time the case appears in some court, if you're a big enough celebrity, you will again be on the front page. So a society which can't guard my privacy, a society which can't give me my fundamental rights, a society which will not allow me to enjoy a lifetime or a career of hard work, a society which will brand me a criminal, quasi-criminal, subject me to legal proceedings, all of which, why? Because there is a leak, and the leak itself could be for an illegal purpose. There might have been a theft, as we know frequently has happened in these cases. So the situation today is the very fabric of everything that you value as an individual is at stake because you followed the law, had certain monies that you wanted to use at your discretion, because surely there is no law in this country to say that money tax paid, well earned, can't be deployed as per the law of this land.
Yes.
So why should I be tried for that? So
Point
I think
very
that impact is deeper. But on a much more holistic basis, if India is the country with this ambition of 5 trillion and 10 trillion, the one thing you need is to create a certain respect for entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs mean investment, means jobs. If continuously a successful entrepreneur is going to be on trial in one way or another, I think many of these dreams are just illusions. People will rather go invest in economies and nations where they are not going to go through this sort of a trial all the time.
You made very beautiful 2 points here. Mr. Mohit Saraf, capital will come to a country where capital is celebrated, where wealth creators are celebrated. When wealth creators create wealth, all have jobs, consultants have jobs, lawyers have jobs. Cases come to judiciary when there is actually some feud or some commercial dispute, but that only happens when there is money coming in the country. Do you think we suffer from a socialist era hangover before liberalization, the economy we had, that anybody who makes wealth is bad or to be exposed? For somebody who made wealth legitimately, why should he be exposed? Why should his information be public? What risks do we run if we as a society hound people who make money a bad word, make showing wealth a bad word? Do you think the kind of way we perceive wealth also shows who we are as a society?
I think we are being a little bit more cruel to the country. This is a global leak. This is not an India specific leak. This has leaked out from agencies involving 200 countries. So this is not an India creation issue. Even the proprietary of the data is a global leak. Now, what has happened in India is whether a newspaper carried it or hundreds of websites carried it. So it's a global leak. This is really, we should not call it an India problem. It's a global problem. I think we have to balance it out as the right to privacy and right of investigation, investigative journalism. And I think these are all have to have a place on earth. What is important is that both from a journalist perspective, from a regulatory perspective, and particularly when we talk about regulatory, you're talking about ED and FEMA and everybody, RBI, everybody. I think they need to investigate. Every time there is a problem, they need to investigate. But I think I can understand that there is a presumption every time there is a trust outside. General government presumption is that that the money is Indian money and it has gone out. That is also okay, and they can investigate. But what is important is that I would say that there need to be certain level of sophistication in that investigation. I think the government agency, whenever they are investigating, everything leaks out, and then the matter continues to be in the news. I think as long as that is done, I would say that will do a larger purpose. I think the government and the agency need to investigate whether it's a rich or poor, whoever, if there is information, they need to investigate. And I think we should not take that away. But what is important is that we general thought process that if there is a money outside, then it has to be an ill-gotten money. It is an hawala transaction. I think that is a very wrong presumption. And I think what you rightly said, it is a little bit of a socialistic world phenomena, which we are still, I think, struggling. Because I think everybody who's got more money, I think a general belief is it cannot be legitimate. And I would say that is where the problem is. But again, that's a mindset issue. I think as if you look at certain reports which has come out in last few years, that really, but post-pandemic, the rich have become much richer and poor have become much poorer. And therefore, as long as the divide continues to go, I think that presumption will continue. I think that's again an important thought.
You made a good point, but as the divide continues to grow, it also puts well-off people at risk. Not every rich man has got bodyguards. Not every rich man can in a sense afford to let the larger society know how much wealth he holds, for what reason he holds. Ruby Singh Ahuja, as from the litigation standpoint, okay, Sachin Tendulkar may not have to face a case. He's too well known. His statements hold a certain value. There are many others whose names come out. They may have to face litigation and in a sense say again and again that the money that they have got is honest. Government officers will keep on appealing. Do you think principally such a leak, say in UK or some other country, and such a leak in India, it actually makes a great impact on common people, in a sense, named who don't have much money, but their name figures in the list simply because they have an account abroad? Because the way the society and agencies here are, that because even the concerned officer wants to show that he investigated, the investigation will go on, because he fears that somebody should not audit him tomorrow, that he did not do his job, he did not pursue the matter. So the investigation is a natural fallout, and you understand this better than all of us. Could you share with us that what risks do we run in India with such kind of leaks for people who are not influential, for people who are just normal rich people having accounts abroad?
Yes, see, I personally feel the problem which we face in India is that our investigative agencies lack sophistication. And they do lack, the problem is of the time we spend on each investigation. And the third problem is that, unfortunately, I have seen, and not only in an investigation like this, in any other investigation, when the other side is little bit wealthy, I'm not even talking of a big business honju, a little bit wealthy, it starts on a negative impression that this money has been raised through illegal sources. So you are already under trial. You have to defend yourself. Now, I can tell you with some sort of confidence that out of the names which have come, I'm again not talking of big businessmen and big sports player, even somebody who hasn't parked too much money outside, and if his or her name is there, I can tell you with some confidence, is collecting his papers, is going to go and sit in a lawyer's office for 3-4 days to tell and prove, because he has to prove now. And just to answer you, I read on Twitter today that I think CBDT or one of the agencies have already formed a committee and they're going to look into it. Now, what I will say, here comes now umpteen number of notices, umpteen number of dates, umpteen number of sittings with your lawyer and trying to say, look, no, but this is legal. This is legal. So you have already put, now there is no offense here. So you have created an offense in the mind of an investigating officer that this money is wrong or this income this person has parked somewhere is wrong. Now you have to prove that. So I think there is where the problem lies in India, because of the system works like this, that the time we spend, that people have spent, I know, 10, 15 years struggling with this. And then what happens? Every case, according to the government or department, must end in the Supreme Court. A 1 lakh rupee tax demand also must go to the Supreme Court. So that is also a problem. You see, if in any other part of the world, I'm sure there will be some investigation, but I think the way we deal with investigation, and coupled with the fact that now in our country, at least, I know that it's there in other parts of the world also, but in India, I feel that media trial has gone to another level. It has absolutely gone to another level. You have been seeing if a person, is caught under a Drugs Act, and I'm sorry, digressing, that 448 hours now you will see that personality's name, which also prejudices the mind of an officer who is a common man. And he also wants to prove to the world that, look, I was very fair. Even the man sitting across my table was little bit high and mighty, but I was very fair. So I think there the problem is with India. And I mean, not because, for any other reason, that is how maybe our system has been. And again, the time we spend. And lastly, I think, as everybody in the panel has said, privacy is very important, reputation is very important. I also feel that time has come that the defamation law must be seriously looked into. If you seriously look into this, bracketing people or, with one stroke of pen, putting everybody and, tarnishing their reputation will end. I think that is a difference which we face, which is there with the western part of the world. There, that law is very strict. You think 1,000 times before you publish a headline naming a person. Here, unfortunately, you do not think. And I can tell you, you do not think anybody receives a defamation notice is very casual about it. That is where the difference lies.
Point very well taken, Ruby. Thanks for sharing your experience of having dealt with many high-profile clients at your litigating law firm. I'll go to Abhimanyu Bhandari. Abhimanyu, you worked in New York. You currently practice in London and Delhi. What differences do you see in how cases are treated? What difference does it make when an expose happens here concerning a businessman and say in UK or New York? Where are we different? You're not audible.
I think that one of the major differences I see is that there is a greater control of a person over his personal information. And as Mr. Desai rightly reminded us, that now we have enough of a constitutional safeguard in Puttu Swamy, the Supreme Court judgment, where also it was said that things like your own income tax return is your personal property and you have rights over it, and you have a right to ensure that no one gets it without following the process of law. And even in right to information, you can't get someone's financial information out. So I think that culture of strong privacy over your own financial transactions and your own financial affairs is, I think, now increasing. And there is a marked difference between European nations and India, because they have a very strict Data Protection Act. So, for example, nobody can really, I can't open my laptop and have everybody's data in it till I am complying with a particular process of law. And, there are checks and balances to ensure that that data is taken with consent and that data is never misused. So I think we need that kind of a regime to really implement the constitutional vision that we've seen in Puttu Swamy. I mean, by no means it is that, our Supreme Court has really laid the foundation to give us the rights of privacy. The dissent of Justice Chandrachud in Aadhaar became the majority view in the Jamaican Constitutional Court, where, Justice C.J. Sykes very famously said that his lordships had a clear-eyed view, referring to the dissent, of the dangers of a state or anyone having control over one's personal information. And I generally preferred his approach to the others. And really meaning that, if you're giving data to someone, whether it's the bank, so a bank has data about all of us, right? They have data about all the companies who've opened an account, who's the ultimate beneficial owners. So that data has to be really confidential. The confidentiality has to be maintained. And I think that we need to bring in here, and we need to bring in a system so that people can't publish, broadcast, or use that data unless they follow certain patterns or there are certain checks and balances. Because without which, we'll have Panama Papers in the one, we'll have Pandora Papers, we'll have some other papers tomorrow, and there'll be more people who will be defamed. There'll be more people who will be painted with the same brush as a fugitive who's run away from a country. The other point I want to make is that it's in the larger public interest of our nation to have Indians reaching out abroad and spreading their global footprint. So it's in the interest of our economy and nation that Indians who make enough money spend some money abroad in buying assets. Because if Indians buy assets abroad, then that creates a more influence of Indians over that particular economy. So you don't want to have you don't want to have just Chinese going and buying all the properties in London and all the French vineyards in France. You want Indians to also participate in that. You want your wealthy Indians to also grow and participate in that, so that they also have an influence over the policies of France towards the world. They also influence the policies of UK over how they do business with India and other countries. So I think it's in the interest, and therefore we need to ensure that we provide that security, that safety to businessmen to go fearlessly and do this and spend money abroad. And if you have to spend money abroad, the ecosystem, and Mr. Rohan Shah, who's an expert on this, will be able to tell us more, that it's like a normal thing to go and open a company in an offshore account, in an offshore entity, because the costs of servicing that company is less. There are tax efficiencies that come in, and there's nothing illegal about it. So it's actually, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, it's like saying, Abhimanyu, you have an account in State Bank of India, Vasant Vihar. To tell a businessman who has bought a French vineyard by sending money legally, tax-paid money, to say that, listen, you have a company in BVI which has this French vineyard. I mean, it's just really silly. And I think with time, with Pandora 2, Pandora 3, and Pandora 4, I think people will stop even reading these. Considering this as any sensational news.
Point very well taken. I would first like to thank all of you for joining me at a short notice. But most of all, I would like to thank you for standing by the Indian business community. It is this community that gets India all the global attention. If we didn't have great businessmen, if we didn't have great capitalists who generate employment, if in the case of Tata's became one of the biggest employers in United Kingdom, they could do because we encouraged them and there was a certain enabling environment. Time and again, the business community should not be always accused and investigated. When they are our primary breadwinners, they run the wheels of the economy. I think as we go in our journey to a 5 trillion economy, it is better that we cherish the wealth creators of India who build influence for us globally, and who also, in a sense, as Abhimanyu alluded to, get soft power. Like when you see a lot of Chinese buying a lot of property in Australia, entire rich promenades are brought by Chinese, or vineyards, as he said. I think this is something I would like to thank all of you for, that you all said in one voice that of course if there is a criminality, do expose. But just because somebody is in a list and he has some money abroad, that doesn't become something that should, one should go to town with. That somebody has money, let everybody know how much he has, where he has, what he has. I would like to thank Abhimanyu Bhandari, Mr. Rohan Shah, Senior Advocate Amit Desai, Ruby Singh Ahuja from Karanjawala and Company, Mohit Saraf, founder and managing partner, Saraf and Partners, for joining me at a short notice. Thank you, viewers, for joining us. Thank you.